Welcome to your deep dive. Today, we're going to be hopping into a time machine.
Ooh, time machine.
I know, right? And we're setting the dial for ancient Rome, specifically the late Roman Republic. Get ready, because we're about to witness a power struggle
Yeah.
of epic proportions, one that changed the course of history. And you know what? It still has lessons to teach us about leadership and ambition even today. We're going to meet Gaius Marius and Lucius Cornelius Sulla. They were two Roman powerhouses. Their rivalry wasn't just like a personal feud or something. This clash ripped apart Roman society. It like really threw this idea of military force in politics into the spotlight
Yeah?
and challenged the very core of how the Republic was structured.
Wow.
It's like Game of Thrones.
Oh, I love Game of Thrones.
I know, right? But with togas
Dog.
and legions.
Awesome. But what I think is so fascinating is how these events from centuries ago still resonate with us. We're facing these similar challenges, ambition, power dynamics, even just the stability of institutions. Looking at the mistakes and successes of people like Marius and Sulla gives us a unique perspective
on leadership.
on institutional integrity and just the long-term effects of unchecked political rivalry. It's like holding a mirror up to our own times.
Okay, so before we dive into all this drama, can you give us a picture of what the Roman Republic was like in the late 2nd century BCE? Like, what was going on? That made it the perfect time for this power struggle between Marius and Sulla.
Well, imagine a Rome that's fresh from decades of war.
Yeah.
They'd won, they gained all this wealth, expanded their territory, but all that victory, came at a price. The gap between the rich and the poor was widening. Corruption seeped into everyday life. Tension between the ruling class and the common people was simmering. It was a society on edge.
So Rome was basically a tinderbox waiting for a spark.
Exactly. And to make matters worse, the Roman military was becoming this force to be reckoned with, especially in politics. You had all these generals coming back from successful campaigns with loyal armies behind them. Their influence was growing. And that's always tricky for a republic that prides itself on civilian leadership.
So that's where our two main characters come in, Gaius, Marius, the people's champion, and then Lucius Cornelius, Sulla, the cunning aristocrat. Let's start with Marius. He didn't come from privilege, did he?
No, not at all.
Yeah.
Marius was what they called a novus homo, a self-made man.
Yeah.
He was from this small town outside of Rome and clawed his way to the top through sheer talent and determination. His background is essential because it made him this symbol of hope, especially for the common people. They saw him as one of their own.
And he became super popular with them, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Marius really made his mark in the Jugurthine War over in North Africa. His victories against King Jugurtha turned him into a legend, especially among the plebeians, the everyday folks of Rome. They saw him as the strong leader who could deliver them from their troubles.
Okay, so then he shakes things up with his military reforms. What was the thinking behind those?
So before Marius came along, you could only join the Roman army if you were a citizen and owned property. Marius saw this vast, untapped resource in all the landless poor, and he decided to change the rules. He abolished the property requirement, opened the ranks to this whole new class of soldiers, men who were desperate for a chance to improve their lives, and to make it even more enticing, he promised them land after their service was over.
So he was creating a professional army, one that was personally loyal to him.
You got it. Tactically, it was brilliant. Marius solved this manpower problem, and he built this devoted fighting force. But think about the long-term consequences for the Republic. This shift in loyalty from the state to a specific general, it's like a recipe for instability. It set a precedent that ambitious figures like Julius Caesar would exploit later on, further weakening the Republic's foundations.
Okay, that brings us to Lucius Cornelius Sulla, Marius's rival. What was his story?
Sulla was practically Marius's opposite. He came from this ancient but financially struggling patrician family. He was a master of strategy and diplomacy. And like Marius, he rose to prominence during the Jugurthine War. Actually, it was Sulla who finally captured King Jugurtha. So imagine the tension already building there. Two ambitious men, both vying for glory and recognition on the same battlefield.
Yeah, I can only imagine. There wasn't much love lost between those two, huh?
Not at all. And their rivalry only intensified during the Social War, when Rome's Italian allies rebelled, demanding Roman citizenship. Sulla once again proved himself a capable general, and this time he earned the favor of the Senate, the traditional ruling body of Rome.
This is where things get really interesting, right?
No, absolutely. Picture this. The Senate appoints Sulla to lead a campaign against Mithridates VI in the east, a very coveted command. But Marius, despite his age and semi-retirement, uses his political clout to have the command transferred to himself. Can you imagine the audacity?
Sulla must have been fuming.
Fuming is an understatement, and his response was something nobody expected. He marched his army on Rome. Can you believe it? A general using his troops to source the issue? That was unheard of. This act of rebellion shattered this traditional separation of military and political power in Rome. It's a pivotal moment that foreshadows the coming chaos and the rise of military leaders like Julius Caesar. It's like someone ripped a page from the rule book and tossed it into the fire.
So Sulla marches off to fight Mithridates, leaving a power vacuum in Rome. What happens next?
Well, Marius allied with those populares politicians, the ones who champion the common people. They seize control of Rome in 87 BCE. And they don't just take power, they launch a purge against Sulla's supporters. Think about that. Roman citizens turning on each other, fueled by political maneuvering and personal vendettas.
This wasn't just a war of words anymore. This was a full-on blood feud.
Absolutely. Roman politics had taken this, terrifying turn. Sadly, Marius's victory was short-lived. He died in 86 BCE. But the seeds of chaos had been sown, and the stage was set for even more violence.
And all the while, Sulla was out there, right? Leading his army in the east, completely unaware of all this chaos erupting back home.
Exactly. And when he returned, victorious from his campaign against Mithridates, he was determined to reclaim what he believes was rightfully his. So, in 83 BCE, Sulla marched on Rome. And this clash ignited the first full-blown civil war in Roman history. Think about that for a moment. Roman legions, who were supposed to be fighting foreign enemies, now pitted against each other on their own soil.
Brother against brother, Roman against Roman. It must have been absolute carnage.
It was a brutal conflict that ripped Rome apart. But Sulla, with his military brilliance and ruthless determination, emerged victorious. And as you'll see in the next part of our deep dive, his victory would leave an indelible mark on the Roman Republic. His rise to power and the methods he used would set the stage for the final act of the Republic and the rise of the Roman Empire.
This is incredible. It sounds like Sulla wasn't just content with winning. He wanted to, rewrite the rules of the game. But we'll have to wait for the next part of our deep dive to explore that.
Join us next time as we unpack Sulla's reign, those controversial reforms, and the ripple effects of this epic power struggle. You won't want to miss it.
Welcome back to our deep dive into this rivalry that totally reshaped Roman history, the clash between Gaius Marius and Lucius Cornelius Sulla. When we left off last time, Sulla was marching into Rome. Victorious after that brutal civil war. Sounds like he wasn't just satisfied with winning, though. Sulla had a bigger game in mind, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Sulla was like a brilliant strategist.
Yeah.
And not just on the battlefield, in the political arena, too.
Yeah.
He didn't just want to defeat his enemies. He wanted to fundamentally reshape the whole Roman Republic to fit his vision. You could say he saw this victory as like a chance to hit the reset button on Roman politics.
Okay, so how did he go about doing that? Did he just start bossing everyone around?
He did something even more dramatic. He declared himself dictator.
Oh, wow.
Now, you might be thinking, wait, didn't Rome have dictators before?
Yeah, that's true.
And you'd be right, they did. But they were usually appointed for a very specific purpose, like some kind of military emergency, and only for a limited time. Sulla's dictatorship was different, though. He assumed all this sweeping power, giving himself the authority to, completely overhaul the Roman constitution. If you were a Roman citizen back then, this would have been a truly shocking turn of events.
Wow, that's a bold move. What was he hoping to achieve with these reforms? What was his vision for Rome?
At heart, Sulla was a conservative. He believed that the Roman Senate, the traditional ruling body of Rome, needed to be restored to, its former glory. He saw the rise of these popular figures like Marius, who appealed directly to the masses, as this dangerous trend. That was threatening to undermine the Republic's stability. And remember, this was a time of immense social and economic upheaval. The old ways were being challenged. Sulla represented a return to, tradition and order, at least in his own mind.
So he was essentially trying to put the aristocracy back in charge, a kind of, back to the good old days movement.
You could certainly see it that way. Sulla's reforms were designed to limit the power of the popular assemblies and the tribunes, who represented the interests of the common people. He also reorganized the courts, making sure the Senate would have more control over the judicial system. It was a systematic effort to shift the balance of power back towards the traditional elite.
It sounds like he was dismantling any checks and balances on the Senate's power. Wasn't that, setting the stage for potential abuse and tyranny?
That's a really crucial point, and one that historians still debate today. But remember, Sulla genuinely believed he was saving the Republic. He saw the Senate as this, anchor of stability, and he feared that giving too much power to the people would just lead to chaos and mob rule. It's a question that's relevant even today. How do you balance the will of the people with the need for stable and effective governance?
That's a good question. But it's interesting, though, even with his, aristocratic leanings, Sulla understood that social and economic inequality had contributed to the unrest. That allowed figures like Marius to rise up in the first place. So he wasn't totally blind to the plight of the common people.
Right.
That's what makes Sulla such a complex and fascinating figure. He wasn't just this power-hungry tyrant. He genuinely wanted to address some of the, root causes of the turmoil that had engulfed Rome. One way he did this was through this massive land redistribution program.
Oh, so he was giving land back to the poor.
Yeah.
This kind of ancient Roman welfare program.
Not quite. Remember those prescriptions we talked about?
Oh, yeah.
Well, Sulla confiscated vast amounts of land from his political enemies, those who had sided with Marius. And he used it to reward his veterans and loyal supporters. It was a strategic move to, consolidate his power base. But it also addressed some of the economic disparities that were fueling tensions in Roman society. It was a way of rewarding his supporters and creating a whole new class of landowners who were loyal to him. That sounds incredibly ruthless, though. Confiscating people's property and then just redistributing it to your allies.
There's no denying that Sulla's reign was marked by brutality. The proscriptions, as they were called, were essentially a hit list of his enemies. Thousands of Romans were executed, their property seized, and their families often driven into exile. It was this period of state-sanctioned terror that left a permanent scar on Roman society. Imagine the fear and uncertainty that ordinary Romans must have felt, knowing that their names could appear on that list at any moment.
It's a sobering reminder that political transitions, even those aimed at restoring order, can come at a terrible human cost. It makes you wonder if Sulla ever considered the long-term consequences of such violence, and if it truly achieved lasting stability.
That's a question that historians continue to grapple with. Did Sulla's reforms actually work? Did they stabilize the Republic? Or did they plant the seeds for its eventual downfall?
Yeah, that's what I'm dying to know. He did strengthen the Senate, right? Didn't that achieve his goal?
He did. But here's the catch. He strengthened the Senate at the expense of those very institutions that were meant to keep its power in check. By weakening the popular assemblies and the tribunes, he made it much harder for the common people to have their voices heard in government. That created a lot of resentment and simmering anger among the lower classes, and it set the stage for future conflict. Essentially, he created a system that was less representative and less responsive to the needs of a large portion of Roman society.
So are you saying that Sulla's attempts to prevent another Marius-like figure from rising to power actually made it more likely that someone even more ambitious would come along and exploit those very weaknesses he created? It's a bit of a paradox, isn't it?
It is. Sulla's dictatorship, while meant to save the Republic, may have actually hastened its demise. Think about it. He showed future generations that power could be seized by force, that the traditional rules of the game could be broken. It's a lesson that ambitious figures like Julius Caesar would learn all too well. In a way, Sulla's actions created this blueprint for the very thing he was trying to prevent: the rise of these powerful individuals who would ultimately bring about the end of the Republic and usher in the Roman Empire.
That's incredibly ironic, isn't it? His efforts to restore order might have actually paved the way for even more chaos and instability down the line. It's a cautionary tale about the unintended consequences of power, even when wielded with what you believe are good intentions.
Exactly. Power can be this double-edged sword. It can be used to achieve great things, but it can also corrupt. And the road to hell, as they say, is often paved with good intentions. The story of Marius and Sulla is a reminder that even the most brilliant and well-intentioned leaders can make mistakes that have profound and lasting consequences.
This is also fascinating. It really makes you think about leadership today and how fragile political systems can be. So after all this upheaval and bloodshed, Sulla decides to step down from his dictatorship in 79 BCE. Does Rome finally return to, some sense of normalcy?
That's a great question, and it leads us into the final chapter of our deep dive. As you'll see, Sulla's retirement didn't exactly bring about the lasting peace he might have hoped for. The seeds of discord he had sown would continue to grow, and Rome's political landscape would continue to be shaken by the aftershocks of the Marian-Sullan conflict.
This is such a cliffhanger. I can't wait to hear what happens next. It sounds like the rivalry between Marius and Sulla had consequences that echoed far beyond their own lifetimes.
Absolutely. Their story isn't just about these two men vying for power. It's about the enduring tensions between tradition and change, between the rule of law and the, allure of authoritarianism, between the needs of the individual and the good of the state. These are themes that resonate throughout history, and they're just as relevant today as they were in ancient Rome. Join us next time as we explore the lasting legacy of these two titans of Roman history and see how their story continues to inform our understanding of power, leadership, and the fragility of political institutions.
Welcome back to our deep dive into one of the most turbulent periods in Roman history, the clash between Gaius Marius and Lucius Cornelius Sulla. We've seen how the rivalry shattered political norms, plunged Rome into civil war, and really set the stage for the Republic's eventual collapse.
Yeah, it's a story that's captivated historians for centuries, and for good reason. The legacy of Marius and Sulla, it goes far beyond the events of their own lifetimes. It really speaks to those enduring challenges of power, ambition, and just like the fragility of institutions, themes that resonate just as strongly today as they did back then in ancient Rome.
That's what's been so fascinating about this deep dive, I think. We've been talking about these two guys as individuals, but their story is really like a microcosm of these much larger forces at play, like the allure and danger of ambition, the unintended consequences of actions, even those that are well-intentioned, and just this constant struggle to balance individual freedom with the need for order and stability. It's like we're looking at a blueprint for political dysfunction that's just been repeated throughout history.
Precisely. And that's exactly why it's so important to understand this period of Roman history. It's not just about, memorizing names and dates. It's about extracting those timeless lessons.
Yeah.
That can help us navigate the complexities of our own political landscape.
Okay, so in this final part of our deep dive, let's shift our focus from the events themselves to those lasting lessons. We can draw from this whole Marius and Sulla saga. What can we learn from their, successes and failures, their triumphs and tragedies, that might help us better understand the challenges we face today?
Well, I think one of the most glaring takeaways is the danger of the militarization of politics. I mean, Sulla marched on Rome twice. That was unthinkable before his time. And we know this set a really dangerous precedent. It normalized using military force to achieve political ends. It's like opening Pandora's box. Once you cross that line, it's almost impossible to go back.
And it's interesting to see how Marius's military reforms, which were meant to solve a manpower problem, actually ended up contributing to this very problem by creating a professional army that was more loyal to its general than to the Roman state itself. He kind of inadvertently laid the groundwork for the rise of these powerful military leaders who would eventually challenge the Republic. It's like he created the tools that were then used to dismantle the very system he was a part of.
Exactly. It's a classic example of unintended consequences. And it highlights a crucial lesson for any society. A strong military is essential for defense, of course, but it must always be subservient to civilian control. When those lines between military and political power get blurred, it can have disastrous consequences for a nation's stability. We see this throughout history, and even in the world today, where that balance between military might and democratic principles is constantly being negotiated.
Another theme that stands out to me is the importance of institutional integrity. Both Marius and Sulla, in their pursuit of power, they bent or broke the rules of the Roman Republic. And as we've seen, those actions had this corrosive effect on the system as a whole. It weakened its ability to function effectively and fairly.
Right, it's like a termite infestation. Once those norms and traditions, the things that hold a system together, start to decay, it becomes vulnerable to collapse. And that's true for any organization, any group of people working together, whether it's a business, a community group, even a family. Maintaining those shared values and principles is so essential for long-term stability and success.
It makes you wonder, though, what were they thinking? Did they not see the damage they were causing? Or were they so blinded by their ambitions that they just didn't care?
It's really hard to say for sure. Ambition can be such a powerful drug, it can cloud judgment, even in the most intelligent and capable people. Maybe they believed the ends justified the means, that their actions, however drastic, were necessary to save the Republic. Or maybe they just underestimated those long-term consequences and didn't grasp how their disregard for the rules would set a precedent for future generations of power-hungry individuals.
So what does this all mean for leaders today? What lessons can we take away from Marius and Sulla that might help us navigate our own political landscape?
I think one of the biggest takeaways is that ambition, while it can be a powerful force for good, needs to be tempered by a strong sense of responsibility, a commitment to the common good. Personal gain should never come at the expense of those institutions and values that hold a society together. True leadership is about serving something larger than yourself and recognizing that power is a privilege, not a right front.
It also highlights, I think, the need for long-term thinking. Both Marius and Sulla, in their own ways, were trying to solve problems, but their solutions were short-sighted, and they created even more problems down the line. It's a cautionary tale for anyone in a position of authority, whether it's politics, business, or anything else. Those decisions you make today will have ripple effects for years to come. So it's so important to consider the long-term consequences of your actions, not just those immediate benefits.
Yeah, exactly. Quick fixes and power grabs. They might seem appealing in the moment, but they rarely lead to lasting stability or progress. True leadership requires patience, foresight, and a willingness to prioritize the long-term health of the system over those short-term gains. It's about building something that will endure, not just grabbing what you can while you can.
It's almost like we're seeing those Roman power struggles playing out in our own time, isn't it? The rise of populism, the erosion of trust in institutions, the polarization of political discourse. It's all eerily familiar. It's like we haven't learned the lessons of history, and we're doomed to repeat those same mistakes.
That's why it's so important to study history, not just as like a collection of facts and figures, but as a source of wisdom and guidance. By understanding how past societies have succeeded or failed, we can gain insights into the challenges we face today and develop strategies for building a more just, stable, and prosperous future. The story of Marius and Sulla is this stark reminder that the choices we make today will shape the world of tomorrow, and that power, unchecked by wisdom and a commitment to the common good, can be a very destructive force.
That's a powerful message, and one that I think we can all take to heart. We've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive, and I don't know about you, but I'm feeling like a renewed sense of appreciation for the complexities of leadership and the importance of safeguarding those institutions that protect our freedoms and ensure a peaceful and just society.
I completely agree. The story of Marius and Sulla is a cautionary tale, it's true, but it's also a source of hope. It reminds us that even when facing immense challenges, individuals have the power to make choices that shape the course of history. By learning from those mistakes of the past and embracing the principles of responsible leadership, we can work together to build a future where power serves the people, not the other way around.
I think we'll all be looking at the news a little differently after this deep dive. Thanks to all of you for joining us on this journey back to ancient Rome. And as always, we would love to hear your thoughts. What lessons do you take away from the story of Marius and Sulla? What parallels do you see between their time and our own? Share your insights with us on social media, and we'll see you on our next deep dive.